For all of you who have been following my channel the last few months, you'll remember Rich's black Strat where the pivot post had broken through to the electronics cavity. I posted that video play by play exactly how I repaired that. Went to this larger fastener, put in a 1-inch diameter maple dowel, and there were a pile of people that sort of screamed, "Why didn't you put those press-fitted fluted metal inserts and a machine thread for the pivot posts instead of this?" Well, guess what, folks? Have a look at this. This is also an American Strat. And this does have those press-fit inserts with the machine-threaded posts that everybody was screaming at me to use. Well, as you can see, both of these ones broke through. So we're not going that route. We're going to get these out. We're going to do exactly the same repair we did on Rich's, and we can kiss this issue goodbye forever. Well, I'm going to start with a little bit of heat because I don't know if those things were epoxied in there. I just apply a bit of heat on that first to get that good and hot before I extract it. That should do it. And as you can see, we've got our trusty hockey puck here so we don't mar the finish. And a little bit of leverage, a little bit of heat. Oh yeah, there was epoxy on there. Yeah, so somebody at some point made an attempt to goop some epoxy in there, hoping that that might hold it, but okay, well that wasn't too bad. Get this other one. Yeah, whenever you're not sure, not a bad idea to apply a bit of heat. There we go. Ooh, yeah, that came out even easier. I had quite a bit of heat on that, actually. Okay, so we're going to mask this off. X marks the spot. I'm going to move that cutter forward so that it just takes out this broken part like we did on Rich's guitar. We'll get the centers for the posts. We can reposition those later, but I'm more concerned with getting rid of all of the fractured wood here. So just kind of turn that cutter and have a look. So just kind of test that. Yeah, that's good. So that's going to cut through this wall. It's going to take out all this broken stuff, and then we'll redo the centers after the fact. Go down a little bit lower still. And that'll give us the depth we need, so we'll just set up for that next post. So I'm less concerned with the centers. We can find those after the fact once those maple dowels are installed. But my concern is just to get all of the fractured wood out of there and stay back far enough from this cavity that we don't break through that side as well. So we're favoring the front edge, and like I said, that'll get rid of all of that fractured stuff. So this is getting the same treatment. We're going to mix up that aviation epoxy and just glue that dowel into place and let it sit overnight. When I get that as close to perfectly flush as possible, you don't want to have to deal with it after the fact. So I'm also kind of marking on either side here where we're going to flatten out this area to match the cavity. Because we're skimming this down, it's rock maple end grain. I put a brand new disc on here, just skimming it down to the line. Very gently. Okay, let's check that against the guitar. Okay, so I'm flattening that outside diameter to match the cavity wall. Brand new 80 grit on there with this maple. Let's have a look. I did point this out in the last video, but I'm going to point it out again. The grain orientation is actually on a little bit of an angle this way. And that's what I wanted. We're going to butter that up with 48-hour cure aviation epoxy. Something that I do not use very often, epoxy, for anything. But this is one of those cases where it warrants it. Happy with that, nice and flush. Got that cavity wall nice and flush. Now we'll cut the next one. 1019.5 is the depth of the cavity we want to fill. So I'm just going to roll this again on this fresh 80 grit. I have that air activated foot switch that I use, momentary switch. Just kind of roll that and stop and check it as I go. Right here. Get 1048, yeah. So 1042, yeah, still got to come down about 20 thou. 1019, 1021. Okay, I'm just gonna freeze that. Can't believe it. 1020. Okay, I'm not pushing my luck. Yeah, I like that grain orientation. That's good. It's going slightly on an angle. Like I said, we're going to butter that up with that 48-hour cure epoxy. We're just marking that cavity line. We'll skim back that outside radius like we did a second ago. Okay, let's check this one. Okay, so we're going to butter those up with epoxy and glue those into place, let them set overnight, and I can get back to Collins 10-string classical. So the trick with this stuff is you got tons of open time, that's not an issue, but the idea is you don't want to put more on than you need. You definitely don't want to have to clean any of this stuff up after the fact. So I'm just kind of buttering up that wall. And I am actually buttering the floor of that cavity as well. And that's It's looking good. Said tons of open time on this, so there's no reason why you can't get it right. And that will do it. So I'll let that sit overnight. So we have let this cure for a couple of days, and now we've got tons of maple to support those pivot posts. It's interesting that last week was the 65th anniversary of the day that Leo submitted his patent drawings to the USPTO for the original vibrato bridge. So that original design 65 years ago, as everybody knows, had 6 screws across the leading edge of that plate. In my 50 years of doing this work, I have yet to see that bridge fail like these new modern ones have. I want to bring you in and discuss all of the critical dimensions for the outside diameter of the holes you drill so that this problem never happens again to this guitar. So long before we go over to the drill press and start drilling holes, all of this needs to be understood. So this is the larger fastener we're going to be using, so we'll be drilling out those maple dowels for this longer and thicker fastener. First thing you have to consider is that this unthreaded portion, that needs to be able to move up and down like a piston after the bridge is installed. So we'll start at the top of the fastener and work our way down. So the height of the unthreaded portion of the cuff is 0.427. The diameter is 0.276. So the initial hole that's drilled needs to be deep enough and a big enough diameter to allow this portion of the fastener to move up and down like a piston. Next thing we're looking at is the height of this threaded portion. So we have to make sure that we get the whole diameter right. Now the outside diameter of the threads is 236 thou. But obviously you can't drill the hole that size because you need the threads to bite into the wall of the hole. The body of the fastener in between the threads is 162 thou. We need to drill a hole that's slightly larger than 162 thou that allows these threads to bite into the wall of that hole to give us our adjustment. So like Rich's Strat, the last one, Rich was here by the way yesterday, dropped off a couple more guitars. So like that other black Strat that you saw a couple of months ago, I scraped some paraffin wax on those threads. So the hole needs to be big enough to allow the fastener to go into it, obviously, but not so big that the threads don't get enough purchase on the inside diameter of that hole. That black Strat that you saw the video on that I did for Rich a few months ago, I just scrape some paraffin wax onto those threads and it moves up and down smooth as silk. Easily as smooth or smoother than the machine fasteners that broke through that cavity wall. So the first 2 holes we're going to drill, we're going to allow for the diameter of this, which is 0.276. I have a drill bit that's 0.2775, just slightly larger. We're going to drill those 2 holes first. That'll allow this portion of the fastener, the cuff, to move up and down like a piston as you adjust the height for the bridge. So let's do that. So for my stress test, I drilled a hole 189 thou, very close to the end of that maple dowel to see if it would split. That moves up and down freely enough. I'm going to cut that open and we'll have a look at how much of a bite we get into the wall of the maple with that size diameter bit. You definitely want to do a test piece before you go to the guitar. And that's how deep of an impression those threads made into that rock maple. I'm happy with that. So 2 things. We got enough of a bite for that fastener to move up and down, but more importantly, it's not too much of a bite that you split the dowel. Now we're ready to drill the guitar. The outside diameter of the threads is 236. The hole we're drilling is 189. So we've made that hole 47 thou less than the OD of the threads, and that's given us the bite we need. It's tight enough that it actually took some of the plating off at the leading edge here. So that's a good indication. Happy with that. So now we have to take into account the height of the threaded portion plus the height of that cuff. Yeah, if we get a total depth of about 1.377, I'll go with that. Well, the bonus about using a brad point bit for that first hole is it allows you to kind of index, there we go, index this bit so that we get this dead center. There we go. So I did a quick mix of this glue boost stuff just to get a color that's kind of close to what's on the guitar, and just kind of painted the top of those dowels. So no, it's not a professional finish. Once it's all together, at a glance you'd never even notice it. I'll bring you in for a closer look when it's all assembled. Just touching this up with some emery cloth. You know, it is what it is. I mean, obviously, you're going to see it. No way around it. Most important thing is, it is structurally 100%. So this is the only hint of that bridge post repair, and that's why I, basically just stained the top of the maple dowel orange. So really, at a glance, looking at this guitar, nobody would ever know any repair was ever done. We got that nut out ultra clean, and now we're making the compensated nut. So let me walk you through that. So the first thing we got to do is we've got to take this down to 125 thou. Now I am going to turn on the dust collector, so we'll make it a bit of noise here. Yeah, 162, we've got a ways to go yet. $143. 133. 127.5. 130. 126.5. 126.5. Okay, so now we're going to go real easy. $125. And I'm bringing you in a little closer on this, so no, I'm not making this up. 125. Other side. $125. So that's our next radius. We took that radius off the fingerboard, and we're going to shape that. See that, I'm just following the line. Okay, now we need to shape the underside of that ledge, and we're going to do that next. And now we'll radius the outside of the crown. It's the last move we make. Erring on the side of caution here, leaving that good and thick, so we've got lots to play with as we cut those values. Okay, so we've traced all these strings all the way across, and you can see that we've left quite a bit of forgiveness on those outside edges. As we're on the home stretch and we make our final adjustments, we'll be able to shift that ever so minutely to get it to line up perfectly dead center with the neck. We're onto the A string. We're tuning that 12th fret note. It's sharp. It's going to come back. So the value for this A string, fret a 12th fret note and open string is done. Now, when we fret that first fret note, well, it's right off the chart because it's way too high, but this is the idea and this is the process that you use, is you leave lots of real estate in that crown so that we can do what we've just done. Still sharp. Let's take it back a little bit more. I'm good with that. Okay, that's got to be filed out. So once again, we left lots of real estate there to play with. So I'm starting by chasing that to the leading edge of the blank, and then we can kind of dial it back. We'll dial it back from there. It's got to come way down. Obviously, that first fret is right off the charts. What you got to be careful with is when you're filing that slot, it's easy to get a false reading. You have to ensure that the highest point on that slot is at the leading edge, and it wasn't, and that's why we're getting a sharp reading now, whereas before it looked okay. So let's dial that back. Okay, that's pretty close. Any other tweaking will be done right at the very end. See, now that's registering flat. There's no way in the world that is flat. The string is hung up in the slot further back. So we'll file that slot and check it again. With the floating Strat vibrato, it is just that. It's floating. It's like trying to tune a trampoline. So you got to make sure as you make your way across that all of the other 5 strings are in tune. See if there's any room to chase it further to that leading edge as we bring the height of the slot down much lower. Much closer. Now I've left quite a bit of material, as you saw earlier, on that nut, so we've got the real estate to kind of play with. But right now that file is binding, so I'm going to wait on that 3rd string until we get on the home stretch. So let's move over to the 2nd string. So we'll file that back. Let's see what we got now. It's not flat now, that's for sure. Now this is way too high, obviously. So it's got to be filed down. So we're lowering that slot and checking it as we go. A little sharp. Let's cut that back. Check it again. Well, the open string and 12th fret are right on the money. That slot just needs to be brought down now. Check it again. run into the same problem. There's so much material on that crown, so I'm going to leave that one too, the B and the G, until we get rid of all that extra material. Let's go to the first string. That is binding. I'm going to open that up before we even get started. Okay, obviously that needs to come way back. That's good. Okay, same deal with this. There's so much material, the file is binding. So I'm going to smooth this down first. We'll come back and then we'll check those last 3 strings again. Well, you know how many times I've harped at you, don't over tighten these cuffs. Well, this is why. This is stripped. Now luckily, I have in my junk box, I have an identical machine head, so we're going to swap that out for Andrew, so he's not left out in the cold with that, because normally you'd have to buy a full set. So we'll swap that out now. Yeah, it must be right inside the machine head. Snug that brand new replacement down. Not too tight. Yeah, I think the rest are good. Yeah, they're all good. It's just that one, just that A string. So here we go. Okay, back to the guitar. Well, we're bringing you back for another look. Now I'm going to take my 17, and now that we've relieved all that extra material off of the nut, I'm going to file that again. It needs to come forward and it needs to come down. 12th fret and open. And 1st fret. Okay, that's still sharp. So we do need to bring that nut, the height of that nut slot. We couldn't do it earlier because there was just too much material that was grabbing the file. I'm making sure that I keep an angle towards the leading edge of the nut as I file. Just a couple more strokes to bring that down. And 1st fret. All right, we're there. Well, that is too high, so it's got to come down. Try that again. Okay, I'm going to leave that because we're going to trim that down a little bit further. The file's still getting hung up in that slot. 1st string, 7th fret, octave. 12th fret and open, and 1st fret. Okay, that I can feel that. That's got to come way down. happy with that. All right, back to the sander for a sec. So Andrew can finally relax and just play his guitar. So here's a good close look at these frets. Before we do anything, it's all masked off and ready to go. And we'll bring you back for a finish shot when we're done. So a couple of tips about masking off these maple necks. I tend to use a low tack painter's tape. The finish looked pretty tight on this one. I don't think it's going to be a problem, but if you can reduce any chance of pulling any lacquer when you go to pull that tape off, you want to take that opportunity. Now the next thing I want to point out is these frets are down pretty low. I did dress out the lion's share. There's a couple of sort of ghost marks in the first 3 frets, but for the most part we got it good and clean. It was actually pretty level along the length, along the trajectory of the string path. Because the crowns were so flat, it makes me think that this was probably done with one of those CNC machines. I have noticed that in the past many times, that these CNC machines do an excellent job of leveling, but not a great job of crowning. So the tops of the crowns tend to end up pretty flat after using a CNC machine. So I went over this by hand with the crowning file and managed to kind of chase the crowns back to center. The frets are pretty low, so there wasn't much crown to work with, but I did end up recrowning anyway and chasing those crowns back to center. So let's get some strings on this thing.